Right now, if you've been chronically stressed for months or years, your brain looks physically different on an MRI scan.
The part responsible for your decision-making, smaller.
The part that stores your memories, smaller.
And the part that generates fear and anxiety, bigger.
This is not a metaphor. This is not motivational language. This is what chronic stress does to the physical structure of your brain. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why these 3 changes create a trap your brain cannot escape on its own, and the evidence-backed protocols that reverse it.
Here is what makes this different from every other "stress is bad for you" video. These 3 changes do not happen in isolation. They feed each other. A shrinking prefrontal cortex means you lose the ability to regulate your emotions. A growing amygdala means everything feels more threatening. A shrinking hippocampus means you can't form the new memories you need to learn your way out. It is a doom loop, and the science behind it is both terrifying and, once you understand the mechanism, deeply hopeful. Because the same neuroplasticity that allowed the damage is the exact system that enables the repair. But first, let me show you how widespread this already is. According to the 2025 APA Work in America report and NAMI Workplace Mental Health Poll, over 83% of U.S. workers report experiencing work-related stress. 76% report some level of burnout. And here is the number that should concern you the most. 94% of adults aged 25 to 34 report symptoms that include fatigue and brain fog. That is not a minority. That is nearly everyone in the prime working years of their life.
You do not need to have experienced trauma for what I am about to describe to be happening inside your brain right now. A 2018 study from Harvard Medical School, using data from the Framingham Heart Study, followed 2,231 middle-aged adults, none of them had dementia, and found that those with elevated morning cortisol showed measurably smaller brain volumes and lower scores on memory and cognitive tests 8 years later.
Everyday stress, normal people, measurable brain shrinkage. So let me walk you through exactly what is happening, region by region.
The prefrontal cortex sits right behind your forehead. It is the most recently evolved part of the human brain, and it handles the things that make you you: complex decision-making, impulse control, long-term planning, emotional regulation. Dr. Amy Arnsten of Yale School of Medicine has spent decades studying what happens to this region under chronic stress. Her research, published in the journal Chronic Stress in 2021, showed that prolonged stress exposure weakens the neural connections within the prefrontal cortex. Her words: high levels of catecholamine release during stress rapidly impair the top-down cognitive functions of the prefrontal cortex while strengthening the emotional and habitual responses of the amygdala. In plain language, stress takes your most advanced thinking center offline and hands control to the most primitive part of your brain. Research across multiple labs shows that chronic stress can reduce prefrontal cortex volume by 10 to 15%. That is not subtle. That is a measurable loss of the brain tissue you need to think clearly, plan ahead, and regulate your own emotions.
And if you have ever thought, I know what I should be doing, but I just can't make myself do it, this is a significant part of the biological explanation. It is not a discipline problem. It is a prefrontal cortex problem.
The hippocampus is your brain's memory formation center. It converts short-term experiences into long-term memories, helps you navigate spatial environments, and plays a critical role in learning new information. The late Dr. Bruce McEwen of Rockefeller University, widely considered the world's foremost researcher on stress and the brain, documented in his landmark 2015 review in Neuropsychopharmacology that chronic stress causes dendritic remodeling in the hippocampus. The dendrites, the branching structures that neurons use to communicate with each other, literally retract. They pull back. The connections thin.
In severe cases, the numbers are striking. Studies in populations with PTSD, originally published by Bremner and colleagues in the American Journal of Psychiatry, showed hippocampal volume reductions of 12 to 26% compared to controls.
But you do not need PTSD-level stress for this to affect you. That Harvard Framingham study I mentioned earlier found measurable hippocampal changes in everyday adults with elevated cortisol. No trauma diagnosis required.
This is why chronic stress makes you forgetful.
It is why you walk into a room and cannot remember why you were there. It is why you used to feel sharp, and now everything feels like it is behind a fog.
Your hippocampus is physically smaller than it used to be, and that changes everything about how you process information. Now, most people would expect that if stress shrinks parts of the brain, it would shrink everything equally, but it does not.
The amygdala, your brain's threat detection center, the region responsible for processing fear, anxiety, and emotional reactivity, does the opposite. Under chronic stress, it grows.
Research across multiple labs shows that the amygdala can enlarge by 5 to 10% under sustained stress, and functional MRI studies show a 30% increase in amygdala activity in chronically stressed individuals.
This is why you become more reactive over time. Small inconveniences feel like emergencies. Minor conflicts feel threatening. You snap at people you love over nothing. Your emotional responses become disproportionate to the situation. And that is not a personality flaw. That is a physically enlarged fear center operating with reduced oversight from a shrinking prefrontal cortex.
This is the architecture of the doom loop.
But here is where I need to add something important, because getting this wrong is what separates real science from fear-mongering content.
Cortisol is not inherently your enemy. A December 2025 study from Yale School of Medicine, led by Dr. Elizabeth Goldfarb and published in Science Advances, found that cortisol actually enhances emotional memory formation. It strengthens the coordination between emotion processing networks and memory networks in your brain.
Stress responses are fundamentally adaptive and can help you form strong memories, but this is specific to experiences that you find to be emotionally intense or meaningful. Cortisol is a tool your brain evolved to use. The problem begins when the tool never gets put down. Acute stress, a deadline, a difficult conversation, a physical challenge, triggers cortisol, sharpens your focus, strengthens your memory of the event, and then subsides. That is the system working as designed. Chronic stress, months or years of unresolved pressure with no recovery, keeps cortisol elevated continuously, and that is when the structural damage begins. The distinction matters, not because it softens the message, but because understanding it is what allows you to use the reversal protocols effectively. So what is actually happening inside your neurons when cortisol stays elevated? The answer comes down to one molecule, BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Think of BDNF as fertilizer for your brain cells. It stimulates the growth of new neurons, strengthens dendritic branching, and builds the synaptic connections that underpin learning and memory.
Here is the problem. Research reviewed in Frontiers in Endocrinology in 2024, building on decades of work, has shown that sustained cortisol exposure suppresses BDNF expression in the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex.
Cortisol literally turns off the gene that tells your brain to grow and repair itself.
That is not a metaphor. That is what happens at the molecular level. And this creates the doom loop at the deepest level. Chronic stress raises cortisol. Elevated cortisol suppresses BDNF. Suppressed BDNF means fewer new neurons, weaker connections, and shrinking brain regions. Those shrunken regions make you less capable of managing stress, which raises cortisol further. A 2006 study from Princeton University, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences by Marescu and colleagues, proved this directly. Sleep deprivation, one of the most common consequences of chronic stress, inhibits neurogenesis in the hippocampus by elevating glucocorticoids. When they experimentally clamped cortisol levels during sleep deprivation, neurogenesis was preserved. The cortisol was the direct cause.
Your brain wants to heal. Cortisol is blocking it. But here is where everything changes, and this is the part most people never hear.
The same neuroplasticity that allowed the damage, the same system that shrank your dendrites and weakened your connections, works in both directions. Remove the chronic cortisol, restore BDNF, and the brain begins to physically rebuild. This is not theoretical. It has been measured. In 2011, Dr. Kirk Erickson of the University of Pittsburgh published a study in PNAS, one of the most respected scientific journals in the world, that changed how we understand brain recovery. He took 120 older adults and randomized them into two groups, aerobic exercise or stretching.
After 1 year, the aerobic exercise group showed a 2% increase in hippocampal volume. The stretching group continued to shrink.
2% may sound small, but remember, this is volume that had already been lost. The brain grew back, and greater increases in fitness directly correlated with higher BDNF levels and improved spatial memory.
The protocol is not extreme. Moderate aerobic exercise, brisk walking, cycling, swimming, for 30 to 40 minutes, 3 times per week. Consistent effort over months. The brain responds. In 2011, a research team at Massachusetts General Hospital and Harvard Medical School, led by Dr. Sarah Lazar, published a study that measured the brains of participants before and after 8 weeks of mindfulness-based stress reduction practice. The results: increased gray matter density in the left hippocampus and decreased gray matter in the amygdala. The memory center grew. The fear center shrank. In 8 weeks, the practice averaged 27 minutes per day. Not hours, not a retreat in the mountains. 27 minutes of structured mindfulness meditation consistently for 8 weeks. Now, this was a small study, 16 participants in the treatment group, but it has been replicated in subsequent research, and the Harvard pedigree gives it significant weight. The direction of the findings is clear. Meditation does not just feel calming, it physically restructures the brain regions damaged by chronic stress.
And then there is sleep, which may have the fastest measurable impact of all.
That Princeton PNAS study by Marescu and colleagues found that after chronic sleep deprivation suppressed neurogenesis, restoring normal sleep patterns recovered hippocampal neurogenesis in approximately 2 weeks.
2 weeks. That is how quickly the brain begins generating new neurons once cortisol levels drop to normal ranges during proper sleep. This is why sleep is not optional in a stress recovery protocol. It is the foundation. Without adequate sleep, cortisol stays elevated overnight, the exact window when your brain is supposed to consolidate memories, prune waste products, and grow new neural connections. 7 to 9 hours, consistent sleep and wake times, a dark, cool room. No screens in the final hour. These are not wellness platitudes. These are the environmental conditions under which cortisol decreases and BDNF expression recovers. So here is what the evidence tells us, assembled into one framework. Exercise rebuilds hippocampal volume, 30 to 40 minutes of aerobic movement, 3 times per week with measurable results within 12 months. Meditation restructures both the hippocampus and the amygdala. 27 minutes per day of mindfulness practice, with measurable changes in 8 weeks. Sleep restores neurogenesis. Proper sleep architecture recovers new neuron growth in as little as 2 weeks. And all 3 work through the same mechanism, reducing cortisol and restoring BDNF. The fertilizer comes back. The brain starts growing again. These are not 3 separate interventions. They are 3 entry points into the same reversal system. Start with whichever one is most accessible to you today and build from there.
If you have been living under chronic stress and wondering why you feel foggy, reactive, and not like yourself, now you know. It is not a character flaw. It is a structural change in your brain, and it is reversible.
Here is your action step. Pick one of the 3 protocols, exercise, meditation, or sleep, and commit to it for the next 2 weeks. Not all 3. 1. Give your brain a single entry point into the reversal cycle, and let the science do what it does.
If this video gave you a framework you can actually use, subscribe to Quantum Self. Every video on this channel is built the same way. The research first, then exactly what to do with it.
Your brain is not broken. It is waiting to rebuild. Give it the signal.